Welcome to Sleepy Lore. Tonight, we follow Perseus, the Greek hero born beneath a king's fear, raised on a distant island's wind, and sent on an errand so impossible that only the gods could equip him for it. His is a story about the tools we are given when we cannot face something directly, and about the strange grace of looking away. Allow yourself to settle in, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you. There was a king in Argos named Perseus, and he was the kind of man who could not bear uncertainty. He ruled his kingdom with careful hands, kept his borders, counted his grain, watched his walls. And yet something inside him knew, in the way that certain men always know, that the ground beneath him was not as solid as it appeared. He had no son. He had a daughter, Danaë, whose beauty was remarked upon quietly by everyone who passed through the palace, the way people remark upon a thing they are not quite sure they are allowed to admire. And Perseus, having no male heir, did what kings of his era did when the future frightened them. He traveled to the oracle at Delphi, and he asked what the oracle always made more difficult. He asked about what was coming. The oracle spoke as oracles do, without softening. His daughter's son would one day kill him. That was all. That was enough. You might understand, if you think about it quietly now, the particular kind of dread that follows a person who has been told something they cannot unknow. It settles behind the eyes. It changes the shape of every ordinary morning. Perseus returned to Argos, carrying that prophecy inside him like a stone. And he did what frightened men do when they cannot destroy a threat. He tried to contain it. He had Danaë locked in a tower of bronze, beneath the earth in some versions of the telling, or above it in others. The specific architecture matters less than the feeling of it. The sense of a woman sealed away from the world because a man was afraid of what her future might produce. But the gods are not deterred by bronze, or by locked doors, or by the careful logic of frightened kings. Zeus, who moved through the ancient world in forms that suited his purposes, came to Danaë as a shower of golden rain, drifting down through a small opening in the ceiling of her tower, warm and luminous and strange. Whether you read this as metaphor or as the literal grammar of the mythic world, the effect is the same. Something entered where it had not been invited. Something warm and divine poured itself into the sealed space, and in the fullness of time, Danaë gave birth to a boy. She named him Perseus. You can imagine the silence that would have followed. A woman alone in a bronze room, a newborn making the sounds that newborns make, and the knowledge that she could not hide this for long. She did not hide it long. When Perseus discovered what had happened, he found himself standing at the border between two impossible choices. He could not kill his daughter. That would bring its own divine punishment. He could not kill the infant. The gods were already too close. So he did a third thing, a thing that has the character of a wish more than a decision. He sealed Danaë and her infant son inside a wooden chest and set them adrift on the sea. He let the sea decide. He gave his fear to the water and walked back inside his walls, and tried, perhaps, to believe that what floated away from him would not come floating back. The chest drifted. Inside it, in the dark, in the smell of salt and old wood and fear, Danaë held her son. There is a fragment of a poem attributed to Simonides, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, in which Danaë speaks to Perseus as they drift, a lullaby of sorts, telling her sleeping son that if he knew what she was carrying, he would cry. But she asks him to sleep, to let the sea sleep, to let the endless danger sleep along with him. It is one of the oldest sleep invitations in Western literature. A mother asking the dark to pause, asking the waves to be gentle just a little while longer. The sea was, in this instance, gentle. The chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, and it was found by a fisherman named Dictys, whose name in Greek means something like net, which seems right. He was a man of the sea, a man whose life was spent pulling things from the deep. And he found this woman and her child alive, waterlogged and blinking in the Aegean light, and he brought them home. He was kind to them. He gave them shelter and work, and something resembling a normal life, which is a form of heroism that does not often appear in the myths, but which is worth noticing. The ordinary human goodness of a man who simply helped. Perseus grew up on Seriphos, grew up beside the sea, grew into the particular kind of young man that myths require. Strong, quick, proud in the way of those who have never quite known where they belong. He knew who his father was. He carried that knowledge the way children of unusual fathers often do. A little uneasily, a little defensively, unsure how much of himself was divine and how much was just a boy from a fishing island who didn't know yet what he was capable of. He would find out. The king of Seriphos was named Polydectes, and Polydectes was not like Dictys, his brother. Where Dictys was generous and plain, Polydectes was calculating, the kind of man who wanted things and knew how to arrange for other people to obtain them for him. What he wanted was Danaë. She had been a beautiful girl in a bronze tower. She was a beautiful woman now, and Polydectes desired her in the way of men who are accustomed to having what they want. Perseus was in the way, so Polydectes devised a scheme of elegant cruelty. He announced a feast, a great celebration, supposedly in honor of his courtship of another woman entirely, and at this feast each guest was expected to bring a horse as a gift. Perseus had no horse. He was a fisherman's ward, not a nobleman's son, not in any practical sense. And Polydectes, smiling in the way of men who have already calculated the outcome, asked Perseus what gift he would bring instead. Perseus, young and proud and not yet wise, said the first impossible thing that came to him. He would bring the head of Medusa. A silence presumably followed that. Medusa was a Gorgon, one of 3 monstrous sisters who lived at the edge of the known world, in a place so far that it bordered on the not quite real. She had hair made of living serpents. Her gaze turned living things to stone. People who went looking for her did not return, or returned as landscape, as permanent features of the ground they had walked on. She was, in every practical sense, unkillable by ordinary means, and Polydectes knew this. He wanted Perseus gone. He wanted Perseus turned to stone or simply lost forever in the geography of impossible things, and then Danaë would be alone, and Polydectes would have what he wanted. But the gods were listening. There are stories in which the heroes are entirely self-made, in which the task is accomplished through will and cleverness alone. Perseus is not one of those stories. What happens next is a lesson in the kind of help that comes when you are willing to accept it. The kind of help that requires you to admit that you cannot do what needs to be done with your own hands alone, that the task is genuinely beyond you, and that is all right. Hermes came to Perseus, and Athena came too. Gray-eyed Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, of craft and cunning, who had her own reasons to see Medusa defeated. They came in the way the gods of mythology tend to arrive, slipping into the ordinary light of the world, recognizable only in the way that true things are recognizable, not immediately but deeply. They brought gifts. Hermes gave Perseus winged sandals, Talaria, shoes with small golden wings at the ankle, so that Perseus could move through the air the way fish move through water, effortlessly, without the weight of the earth pulling at him. They gave him the kibisis, a special bag made to hold what could not safely be looked at directly. Because the head of Medusa, severed, would still have the power to turn anyone who met its gaze to stone. And Hermes gave him an adamantine sickle, a blade that could cut what ordinary blades could not. Athena gave him something stranger and more important, her shield. Polished until it threw back the world like a mirror, the shield could show you what was behind you, what was beside you, what you could not afford to look at with your own eyes. It was not a weapon, it was a way of seeing. It was a means of approaching the unapproachable, by not approaching it directly at all. They also told Perseus where to go, first to the Graeae, 3 ancient sisters who lived in a land of permanent gray twilight, who alone knew the location of the Hesperides, the nymphs who kept the helm of Hades, the cap of invisibility, and who could tell him where to find the Gorgons. From the Hesperides, in some versions of the telling, Perseus would receive the helm of darkness, a cap that, when worn, rendered the wearer entirely unseen, to move invisibly, to approach without being noticed, to arrive at the edge of the impossible thing without announcing yourself. The equipment for this journey, you might notice, is all about indirection, winged feet to move through air instead of earth, a mirror shield to see without looking, a bag to contain what cannot be safely faced, a cap of invisibility to act without being seen. Every gift is a form of approaching something obliquely, of doing something by not doing it directly. The Graeae were 3 sisters, Pemphredo, Enyo, and Danaë, and they were ancient in the way that certain things in mythology are ancient. Not old like a mountain is old, but old like a dream is old in a way that seems to precede ordinary time. They had been gray since their birth. They had one eye between them and one tooth, and they passed these things back and forth in the dimness of their twilight home, taking turns at perception, taking turns at whatever small pleasures could be had by 3 sisters sharing the equipment for ordinary life. Perseus came to them in the gray light, and he watched, carefully, patiently, and when one of the sisters passed the eye to another, in that moment between one hand and the next, when none of them could see, he reached out and took it. He held it. There was, you might imagine, an uproar. 3 ancient sisters in a landscape of permanent twilight, suddenly blind, calling out, demanding the return of their single shared ability to perceive the world. And Perseus held the eye, not cruelly, not gleefully, but with the particular calmness of someone who has been told that this is the only path forward. And he bargained. Tell him where to find the nymphs of the Hesperides. Tell him where to find the path to the Gorgons. Tell him this, and he would give back what he had taken. They told him. There is something worth sitting with here, in the quiet of this late hour. Perseus, the hero, accomplished the first real task of his quest, not through strength or combat or divine power, but through patience and timing, by waiting for the moment of transition, the moment between, the moment when the eye was in neither hand, and stepping into that gap. It is a quiet kind of courage. It does not announce itself. It simply pays attention until an opening appears. He found the nymphs. He received the helm of darkness, and then, wearing winged sandals, carrying the sickle, the kibisis, the mirror shield, invisible beneath the helm of Hades, Perseus flew toward the edge of the world where the Gorgons slept. You should understand something about Medusa before this part of the story continues. She was not always what she became. In the older tellings, the ones that drift beneath the more familiar version the way sediment drifts beneath moving water, Medusa was once a mortal woman of extraordinary beauty. What happened to her, whether through divine punishment or divine carelessness or something in between, is its own kind of story, its own kind of loss. But by the time Perseus finds her, she has been Medusa for a long time. and she sleeps among her two sisters on the rocky shore of a place that is barely a place at all, at the far edge of the world where the light behaves differently. Perseus came to them invisibly. Around the sisters, all three, Medusa and the two immortal Gorgons who slept beside her, there were statues, or what had once not been statues, the petrified remains of those who had come before with the same general intention, who had approached too directly, who had looked when they should not have looked. Perseus did not look. He held up the shield, Athena's bright mirror, and watched the world behind him, the world to his side, the world he was not facing. He watched Medusa's reflection in the polished bronze, and in the reflection she could not hurt him, because the reflection was not her gaze, but only its image, and an image is a different thing from the thing itself. He moved toward her carefully, watching only the surface of the shield, navigating by the world as it appeared to him reversed, moving through a kind of dream geography, the real world made safe by being shown to him sideways. And in one swift motion, with his eyes still turned away, with his face still angled toward the reflected world, he brought the sickle down. The deed was done before he had to look at it directly. He placed the head in the kibisis without looking at it, guided by hands that knew what they were doing, even as his eyes stayed away. And then he rose on the winged sandals into the air, the two immortal Gorgon sisters waking with a terrible sound below him, and he flew, invisible, away. He was flying home over the coast of what would become Ethiopia, or what mythology tells us was Ethiopia, which in the ancient Greek imagination was a place somewhere at the edge of the known world, sun-warmed and vast. When he saw something below him that interrupted his return. Chained to a coastal rock, the sea rising around her, a young woman waited. Her name was Andromeda. Her mother, Cassiopeia, had boasted, as Cassiopeia tended to do, that her daughter was more beautiful than the Nereids, the sea nymphs, and Poseidon had taken offense on his children's behalf. The punishment was what punishments in mythology often are, something that fell on the innocent alongside the guilty. A sea monster, the Dictys, had been sent to ravage the coastline, and the only way to stop it, the oracle had said, was to offer Andromeda to it. Her parents, facing the impossible arithmetic of a kingdom's survival versus a daughter's life, had done what the oracle required. They had chained her there. She was waiting for something monstrous to come out of the water. What came instead was Perseus, dropping out of the sky with his winged feet and his bag and his invisible cap, still wearing the gear of the impossible, the equipment assembled by gods and stolen from ancient sisters in a gray land. He saw her chained to the rock. He saw the situation. He made very quickly a bargain with her parents. He would save her if they would give him her hand in marriage, which they agreed to with the speed of people who did not believe it was going to work. It worked. When the sea monster surfaced, Perseus used the head, with his face turned away, holding the kibisis open just enough, and the Dictys met the gaze of Medusa, and the sea monster became a new piece of the coastal rock, and Andromeda was unchained and alive. And that is the part of the story that the paintings always show. The hero in the sky, the monster turning to stone, the woman unchained on the rock, the particular moment of rescue. But what the paintings cannot quite show is that Perseus accomplished even this indirectly. He did not fight the monster with his own strength. He did not look it in the eye and overpower it. He turned away, and he held up what he had already gathered on the impossible journey, and he let the tool do the work. He saved Andromeda by not facing the monster, by using the very nature of the monstrous thing against itself. He returned to Seriphos with Andromeda, and he returned to find that his mother, Danaë, had been hiding in a temple or a shrine, depending on which version you follow, fleeing the increasingly insistent pursuit of Polydectes, who had not expected Perseus to return at all, and certainly not with what he claimed to have. The confrontation was brief. Polydectes, facing a young man who stood in front of him with a bag that should not have been possible to carry, refused to believe him. He mocked Perseus in front of his court. He called the quest a fantasy, a lie, the boasting of a boy. And Perseus, who had faced the Graeae sisters without flinching, who had approached Medusa with his back turned, who had dropped from the sky above a sea monster, looked away, held the kibisis up, and showed Polydectes what was inside. The throne room became a gallery of stone figures. Polydectes and his court were added to the growing collection of permanent things that had once been living. A quiet ending for a man who had sent a young man on an impossible journey in order to be rid of him. Perseus gave the kingdom of Seriphos to Dictys, the fisherman who had been kind. It is the kind of detail that myths include with almost no ceremony. A single line that contains a whole ethics. The man who helped when helping was just a choice gets the gift. The man who schemed gets the stone. And then came what the myth calls a return, though returns in mythology rarely feel simple. Perseus took his mother and his new wife and traveled back to Argos, back to the kingdom of Acrisius, the grandfather who had sent them both to sea in a chest. Acrisius, hearing that Perseus was coming, fled. The prophecy remembered itself. The old king ran, the way people run from things they know they cannot outrun. And Perseus, with no intention of fulfilling the prophecy, went to compete in the funeral games at Larissa for a king he didn't know. The kind of thing young men do, athletic and eager and full of the energy of the returned hero. He threw a discus. The wind, or fate, or the particular geometry of that afternoon carried it sideways into the crowd. An old man was struck. The old man died. The old man was Acrisius. The prophecy fulfilled itself without Perseus meaning anything by it. He did not seek his grandfather. He did not know the old man was there. He threw a discus at a game, and the future that Acrisius had built his entire kingdom to prevent arrived anyway, arriving sideways, arriving the way the oracle had promised, and yet in a form that no one could have predicted, carrying with it no malice, no intention, nothing that looked anything like a son's murder, just a young man, a discus, a gust of wind, and the end of an old man's long fear. That is the shape of the story. That is how it closes. Perseus did not want to rule Argos after that. He traded kingdoms with a cousin, took Tiryns instead, built a life, built a city with Andromeda, and eventually, after the kind of long life that mythology grants to those who survive their own impossible tasks, became a constellation. He is still there, on clear nights, faint and fixed above the northern horizon, near Andromeda, near the Pleiades, arranged in the permanent geography of the sky. You may wonder, in the soft blurring that happens at the edge of sleep, what Perseus is actually about. Because myths always mean something beyond their events. They are told and retold not because people forget the story, but because the story contains something they need to return to. Something they are still trying to understand, still trying to hold. Perseus is about indirect vision. It is about the gifts we are given for the impossible things. The shields that let us see what we cannot look at directly. The bags that contain what we cannot hold with bare hands. The caps that let us move through danger without announcing ourselves. Every person carries their own version of these tools. The therapy that helps you look at the childhood you cannot face straight on. The metaphor that lets you talk about the grief you cannot name. The story. This story, tonight, that lets you approach the difficult things sideways, lets you sit with something old and true without being overwhelmed by it. Medusa is often read as a symbol of what paralyzes. What, if we face it directly, turns us into stone, into people who cannot move, cannot speak, cannot act. We all know what our Medusa is. We all have something we have circled for years, approaching carefully, never quite meeting its gaze. And the lesson Perseus offers is not that you should simply be braver, simply look harder, simply overcome your fear through willpower. The lesson is that there are tools, there are shields, there are other ways of seeing. The bravery is not in the looking, it is in the willingness to approach, even sideways, even with your eyes turned away. The winged sandals are the ability to rise above the situation, to gain perspective, to see from a different altitude. The kibisis is the container you build for what you cannot live with directly. The journal, the ritual, the ceremony, the art. The helm of invisibility is the quieting of the self that lets you act without the weight of being watched, without performance, without the self-consciousness that turns effort into stone before it can move. And Athena's shield is the story, the myth itself. The thing you hold up between yourself and the overwhelming reality that shows you the shape of it, reflected and manageable, transformed into something you can understand and carry. This is why people return to Perseus, not for the monster, not for the hero, for the mirror. Rest now. Let the images of the story settle into whatever they settle into at the edge of sleep. The golden rain through a high window, the chest on the dark water, the gray light where three sisters share a single eye, the polished shield and the careful approach, the young woman unchained from the rock, the old man struck by something he never saw coming, the constellation on the northern horizon, fixed and dim and permanent. You have your own impossible tasks. You carry them. They are there in the morning and there in the evening, and sometimes they are there in the middle of the night, which is where you are now, somewhere in the quiet hours, letting the story do what stories do. You do not have to face them directly tonight. You have your own tools, though you may not always name them. You have your own forms of indirect vision, your own ways of approaching what you cannot approach head-on. The story knows this. Perseus knew this. Athena, handing him the shield, knew that the most important thing she was giving him was not a weapon, but a way of seeing, a way of being present with the impossible without being destroyed by it. Let the sea be calm. Let the chest drift gently. Let the golden rain fall where it falls, warm and strange and full of something you did not plan for, but which is yours now, which has always been yours. Let the Graeae sisters sleep. Let the Gorgons sleep. Let the monsters of the deep settle back into the deep. You are already returning. You are already on your way